Jon Sopel of the Newsagents and the Newsagents USA is in the studio with me. Jon, they don't meet until around 5:15 our time, UK time. Are we expecting any surprises here? Or, I mean, I suppose that you can always expect surprises with Donald Trump, yeah. But there's a few sort of predictable things that we can look at.
Well, look, we know what Keir Starmer's ask is, and he will ask it politely, and he will ask it, he'll try to be persuasive, but he will know that he's got to tread carefully, that Donald Trump is difficult to predict, and that you don't want to set him off, and you want to choose your words with care. And I would guess that Keir Starmer has had a very restless night at the very luxurious British residence on Massachusetts Avenue in Washington, D.C., thinking about this meeting, because there's so much at stake for Britain to a lesser extent, to Ukraine for a much larger extent, and whether he can get any commitment from Donald Trump about a security guarantee. And very rightly, you play at the top of your show that clip of Donald Trump saying it, frankly, that's not much to do with us. Now, arguably, if you've got this huge minerals deal that Ukraine is supposedly meant to be signing on Friday at the White House, Zelensky's on his way in Ireland today, in America tomorrow for that meeting with Donald Trump. If there is that big deal signed and you have thousands of US workers in mining or extraction industries, whatever, trying to get these rare earth minerals out of the ground, then America does have some interest in keeping
want to protect it.
And so I think that somewhere around there is where there'll be the broad basis of a deal. But I mean, this thing that is still there are so many unknowns. I mean, for example, why are Britain and France and Germany outside of any negotiations if they are going to be the security force that is going to patrol this kind of peace line between Russia and Ukraine? What is the deal that Zelensky gets in return for handing over half the mineral rights of Ukraine to the United States of America? Because if he's doing it and not getting any security guarantees, that shows you how much Donald Trump has forced him against the wall and has threatened to mug him of anything he owns. And
to help Putin mug him further.
And so, all of this is suboptimal, given where we were a few months ago, where you had a US administration that was foursquare behind Ukraine. We've got Donald Trump, who has called Volodymyr Zelensky a dictator, but he will not call Vladimir Putin a dictator. That tells you a lot that you need to know.
And the public utterances of both men, Keir Starmer and Donald Trump, have clearly been very different indeed. However, that announcement on defence spending earlier this week tells us something, doesn't it? It tells us that the cage rattling by Donald Trump has started to work. A shift from the UK, a shift from France, calls for others to do similar. So to that degree, Trump is getting what he wants from Europe on that front, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. And I mean, if you look at just the UK example, the reduction in overseas aid spending is exactly what America has just done, which is to cut overseas aid spending. So it looks like, please like what we're doing here, Mr. President. The problem is that Donald Trump will take that and say, that's great, thank you very much, I want more. And I think that, don't think that Donald Trump is going to say, well, having seen, Keir, what you've done, I now say there will be no sanctions, there'll be no tariffs on British goods, and we will do whatever you want in Ukraine. It's not going to work like that.
Are we seeing, let's imagine Donald Trump had never happened. Isn't the truth that America has always had the whip hand in many of these kinds of discussions? They've just come out Biden style, Obama style, Bush style, and been polite and elegant in public. But in private, they've also said, do as you're told.
Of course. If you look at the history of the special relationship, and having lived in Washington for 8 years and spent a lot of time thinking about this issue, you go back into history. You go back to the Second World War, when we barely had a navy worthy of its name, and we needed ships. The Americans sold us a bunch of rust bucket old ships from the First World War that they had no further use for, that were decommissioned and were letting in water, and charged the UK a fortune, the so-called Lend-Lease deal. You look at Suez. where the Americans said, if the British carry on with this joint French expedition of retaking the Suez Canal, we will bankrupt you. Literally, that is what they said. They would just say to Britain, we will cut you off and you will be bankrupt within days. And that is why it stopped. America is not afraid to use force, just as Donald Trump is doing now with President Zelensky.
He just enjoys us seeing it in a way that the others didn't.
And it's a big show of force and a big show of power. And Donald Trump does this very effectively. I'll go back to when I was in DC and Theresa May came over as Prime Minister, and she does a joint news conference with Donald Trump and gets an assurance about the future of NATO. And it's seen as something of a victory for Theresa May. She gets on the plane and I think is flying to Turkey from DC to see Erdogan. While she's in the air, the plane has just taken off and Donald Trump announces the executive order banning people from mainly Muslim countries. And it all goes to hell, and Theresa May lands in Istanbul and finds herself having to condemn what Donald Trump has just done. Her new best friend.
Yeah.
So, you can bank these things and think you've made real progress, and it can change on a sixpence and go back to where you were. So, Keir Starmer, I'm sure it will go well. The optics seem to be good, but I mean, it's Donald Trump. You saw the encounter with Emmanuel Macron, which is all hands and feely, touchy, holding hands, rubbing shoulder. I mean, it was kind of get a room stuff.
A bromance.
Yeah. I can't see buttoned up, tight, stiff Keir Starmer being ever so at ease with a lot of that.
No, absolutely not. Those are the kind of, let's say we've almost explained away or reassured people about some of the sort of chutzpah that we're seeing from Trump and the sort of willy waving that he does, if you pardon the expression. But there's something more serious underneath it all, isn't there, when it comes to Vladimir Putin, which is the language around values, the language around Western values of freedom, liberal democracy, all of that, cozying up to somebody who is the embodiment of the opposite of that and giving him room and giving him a lot of room.
Go from Truman to Eisenhower, carry on through to Kennedy, to Reagan, to LBJ, to name all the presidents that have been in the USA since the Second World War. And the one thing that they have all agreed on is the importance of liberal democracy, the transatlantic alliance, the Western security umbrella of NATO. We are now at a stage where America is in a different place. Donald Trump, temperamentally, emotionally, seems to find himself more in the camp of Vladimir Putin in terms of what Vladimir Putin is doing than he is the Western liberal democratic leaders. And the people that Donald Trump most admired from the first time round were Putin, were President Xi, were Viktor Orban in Hungary, was Duterte in the Philippines.
Forgotten about him.
He likes a strongman leader. And these namby-pamby liberal Democrat leaders, he doesn't have a whole lot of time for. And what he expressed yesterday at his first cabinet meeting about the origins of the European Union, that it was set up to stiff America, is just so historically inaccurate. I mean, we can argue about what EU good or bad. It was set up to prevent another world war. And America thought, you know what? Europe working together means our 18-year-olds are not going onto the beaches of Normandy in June 1944 and facing wholesale death. Yeah. That was why the EU came into being.
And the business of admiring strength, you can get that. You can admire strength, but you can also exhibit it. Show it yourself, can't you? And he doesn't seem to do that with Putin. I mean, I'm reminded of it literally just came to me while you were talking. Years ago, I saw Bernard Ingham give a talk, an after-dinner speech.
Former Thatcher
press secretary. And he described how in a very early, it might not have been the first one, but in a very early meeting with Gorbachev, they had, the Foreign Office officials had given her, the lines to discuss the issues. She was obviously very equipped to do it herself, but clearly you would do that in tandem with your colleagues. And he said she did get onto the content that she'd been given, but her opening gambit to Gorbachev was, He ladies first was his, you go first, and her opening gambit was essentially, I mean, I'm paraphrasing what he said, but this was clearly what the sort of meaning behind it was. Mr. Gorbachev, you need to understand that we in the UK think everything that happens on your side of the Iron Curtain is evil. That was her opening gambit, and that's a long way removed from what Trump said to Putin recently, isn't it?
Yes, completely. And I sat in the room at the news conference in Helsinki between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, and it just looked like Donald Trump was desperate to be friends with Vladimir Putin and liked everything that Vladimir Putin was saying, so much so that he had to make an apology when he got back to Washington the next day after that summit, where he said, "I believe you, Vladimir, not my own security agencies, when you tell me that you didn't interfere in the 2016 election." And he said, "I misspoke. What I meant to say was, I don't believe what you..." I mean, it was ridiculous. Yeah. He clearly, temperamentally, really likes... And now, we could spend hours. We could spend until 4:00 discussing why that is. Yeah. It is extraordinary. Does Donald Trump think that Putin has got something on him? Is it just that he kind of admires the fact that Putin has been in power for so long and clung to power? I don't know what it is, but there is some hold that Vladimir Putin has over Donald Trump, and Western Europe is paying the price for that.
I'm glad you mentioned Helsinki there, and the summit in Helsinki going back, a decade? Maybe?
No, it was
less
2018.
2018.
I think, yeah.
Is that the summit in Helsinki where the Syrian solution was essentially carved up? Where there was when Bashar al-Assad was still in power, or was that an early one?
No, that's when Bashar al-Assad was still in power. The main thing was about whether there was... I mean, there were... Look,
the reason I ask is I wonder whether something similar is about to happen
Well,
to
I think
Ukraine.
something similar is happening in the idea of big power diplomacy. That small nations... I mean, Britain's not a small nation.
Get in line.
But, you're not carving up the future of the world. It will be Britain, it will be America, it will be Russia, it will be China. If you're Taiwan, you're worried. If you're Ukraine, you're worried. If you're the Baltic states, you're worried. This is big nation diplomacy where smaller countries are just pawns on the chessboard and have no independent rights of their own.
Is there any chance of an agreement between Starmer and Trump, or will whatever it looks like from the outside, will Starmer today be given his marching orders by Donald Trump?
I don't think it will be either. I mean, what Starmer has in his back pocket is the possibility of offering another state visit to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump loves the royal family, and they were all giddy. I mean, I saw them the night they went to the state banquet. There was a pre-party thing, and I was at that, and they were just giddy with excitement about going to Buckingham Palace, and whether your white gloves that go up to your elbows, whether you wore the rings over the white gloves or under, they were all over the place. That is something that Starmer has in his back pocket.
And he loves William, doesn't he? He's gone on about William.
Yeah, exactly. And hates Meghan. And so, look, there are cards that Starmer has to play. But whether there'll be a wide-ranging agreement where Trump commits to the security of Ukraine, I frankly doubt it.
I don't know whether to laugh or cry that the card he has to play is. Do you want to meet?
It's our soft power.
Do you want to meet the king?
It's our soft power.
I know. Thank you very much, John. Always a pleasure. Jon Sopel, presenter of The Newsagents and The Newsagents USA.